Hi guys, Rachel from Desert Blossom Crafts here. Today I'm going to be showing you how to crochet the Everglade Cowl. This cowl is pretty easy to make. It uses a cool stitch pattern with puff stitches and chains, and it looks kind of tricky, but it's not as tricky as it looks. It's just a rectangle seamed together to make a nice warm and cozy cowl. So this pattern is pretty easy for beginners. You just need to know how to make puff stitches, and I'm going to show you all of that in the tutorial. So let's get started. To make this cowl, there's just a few materials you're going to need. Worsted weight yarn. You can really use any worsted weight yarn. You can check out the description for links to the exact yarns I used in the green one and in this version. This yarn is just Lion Brand Heartland, but any worsted weight will really work. And then for hooks, I am just using a 5.5mm eye crochet hook. So that's all you really need to get started, and then you'll just need a yarn needle to sew it together at the end. So to get started, we're going to make a foundation single crochet row. I find that I love starting with foundation single crochet rather than chain stitches because it's so much more stretchy, and it'll be easier in the long run with that stretchy starting row. So make sure and check out the tutorial in the corner. If you are not familiar with the foundation single crochet, that will be a little bit more of an in-depth tutorial for you to follow. To start, you just chain 2, and then I'm making my first foundation single crochet here, and there's my first one made. So I'm just going to continue that for 43 foundation single crochet. That's how big I made my cowl. If you would like to adjust it though, you can. The multiple is 6 plus 1 foundation single crochet, or 6 plus 2 if you decide to use chain stitches instead. Either way though, adjusting that number will affect the width of it right here, which is kind of like the height when it sits around your neck. So just keep that in mind if you adjust the multiple. Like I said, I'm starting with 43 foundation single crochet, but it can be a multiple of 6 plus 1 for foundation stitches or 6 plus 2 for chain stitches. So here's my finished foundation single crochet row. For the purposes of this example, I've chosen to just do 19 stitches across, which is still that multiple of 6 plus 1. 18 is the multiple of 6 plus 1 gives me 19. But once again, you can make your cowl as wide as you would like. So for row 1, we're going to turn and we're going to chain 3, and this is going to count as a double crochet throughout this pattern. And I'm going to make a double crochet in the second foundation single crochet. Right, so we have the chain that counts for the first one and our double crochet here. Now we're going to make our first puff stitch, and we're going to skip one foundation single crochet and go in the next one. So for a puff stitch, I'm going to yarn over, insert my hook, yarn over, and each time you pull up a loop for a puff stitch, it's a little bit higher than normal. So there's my loop. See how it's a little higher? Then I'm going to yarn over, insert my hook into the same stitch, and pull up another loop to the same height. And I'm just going to repeat that one more time. And now I should have 7 loops on my hook total. And I'm going to pull through, yarn over, and pull through 6 of them. And there's my puff stitch. Almost finished. And then I'm going to yarn over and pull through the last 2 loops. So that's my first puff stitch, but we're going to actually do another puff stitch in here. So we're going to chain 2 first of all, and then we're going to do another puff stitch in the same exact foundation single crochet. Yarn over, pull up, yarn over, pull up, one last time. Now pull through 6 and then pull through 2. So this is like a little puff stitch cluster that I have here. 2 puff stitches with a chain 2 in the center. And the next thing we're going to do is chain 2. We're going to skip 2 foundation single crochet this time and single crochet in the next one. And I'm going to do that one more time, chain 2. And this is like creating a little chain area in between each puff stitch cluster. So I'm going to skip 2 foundation single crochet again, skip these 2, and do a puff stitch in the third one. So here I have my first cluster, a little chain area, and we're going to make another finished cluster here. So I'm going to chain 2 again and make one more cluster in this same stitch. And what I'm going to do for the rest of this row is just keep repeating that across. I'm going to do another chain area and then another cluster. So chain 2, skip 2 foundation single crochet in the next one, chain 2, skip 2, and do another puff stitch cluster. And you're going to repeat this until you have 3 stitches left on your base row. So this is my last repeat, but if you're doing a large cowl, you're going to have a lot more repeats to do. Okay, so there is mine, and you can see I have 3 foundation single crochet left right there. So for this last part, I'm just going to skip this one here and do 2 double crochet in the last 2. Now what I want you to keep in mind with this is on the first and last cluster, you're only skipping 1 stitch. See how with this one you just skip 1 and do 2 double crochet. Same exact thing here. Skip 1 and then start the cluster, but in between for the rest of the row you're skipping 2. So just keep that in mind as you work row 1. So for row 2 you're going to turn and chain 3 again, counts as a double crochet, and this row is going to be pretty easy after you've already mastered row 1. So I'm going to double crochet in that next double crochet there, and the next thing I'm going to do is just make another puff stitch cluster in this chain 2 right here. So I'm going to do a cluster to start out, and I'm just going to insert my hook this time into the chain 2 space rather than an actual stitch. So I'm going to make my puff stitch, chain 2, and make another one into this chain. Oops. Here we go. So there is my first one in, it's like a cluster in a cluster. And next it's pretty easy too, because we're going to do another chain 2 into this single crochet. So we're going to chain 2 and then single crochet in that same single crochet from last row. And this you're just going to keep repeating. Now chain 2 again. So we're just creating another little chain area here. And you're just going to skip all the way to this chain 2 in the middle of the puff stitches and repeat. Puff stitch, chain 2, puff stitch, chain 2, this time go into the single crochet, chain 2, and another puff stitch here. And you're just going to keep repeating this all the way across until you get to your last chain 2 space in between the puff stitches like I'm at here. And once you're done with that, you're just going to do 2 double crochet in the last 2 stitches here. So you're not going in the puff stitch at all. You're going straight to this double crochet and then the last chain 3 space, which counts as a double crochet. And there your row 2 is all finished. For row 3, this is going to be a little bit different. So we're going to turn again, but this time we're going to only chain 1. And this is not going to count as a stitch. This is going to be more of a single crochet row, and the chain is not going to count as a stitch. So you're going to do a single crochet in that very first double crochet as well as the next one. And now we're going to single crochet in the puff stitch, in the chain 2, and in the next puff stitch. So this is the top of the puff stitch right here. And then the chain 2 space, just 1 single crochet. And then here's the top of the next puff stitch. Now, over this chain area, what we're going to do is chain 3, and this is going to complete the chain area, and we're going to single crochet now in the next puff stitch. So we're skipping this whole chain area and going right into this puff stitch. And what this does is it completes in between each cluster area. There's meant to be this little chain area that kind of looks like a fern almost. That's what I think of when I look at it. You have 2, 4, and then 1 closing it off. So that's kind of what we're doing there. Now we're going to continue single crocheting in the chain 2, in the puff stitch, and here we're at another chain area again, so we're going to chain 3 and single crochet in the puff stitch, and you're just going to keep repeating that across. I'm already close to the end, but you would just keep single crocheting in the puff stitches and the chain 2s, and then chaining 3 across the chain areas. So when you get to the end, just keep going through the chain 2, through the puff stitch, and through the last 2 double crochet, and then your row 3 is complete. For row 4, we're going to do something similar to the first 2 rows, but it's going to be a little different. So I want to show you how it's going to be different before we start. So here we have our chain areas and our puff stitch areas, and there's 3 of them in this example. For the next few rows, everything is going to switch. We're going to do puff areas above the chain areas, and we're going to do chain areas above the puff areas. So in this way, we kind of get this alternating effect. Instead of having all the puffs stacked on top of each other, they're going to alternate every few rows and have, so example, if we have these 2, it's going to be puff, chain, and then chain, puff, chain, like that. So that's what we're going to do. So let's go ahead and start. We're going to chain 3 for a double crochet row again. Double crochet in the next stitch. And now we're going to do our chain area over these 3 single crochet here. So we're going to chain 2, and we're going to single crochet in that middle single crochet right there. Chain 2 again, so there's our first chain area. And now we're going to make our puff stitches in this chain 3 space. So I'm going to make my first puff stitch just like usual, pulling up those loops, pull through 6, pull through 2, chain 2, and make another one in this space just like we did down here. So yarn over, insert, so there we go. That's what you're going to keep repeating across. You're going to do a chain 2 and single crochet here again in that center one, chain 2, and puff stitches here. And it's really easy if you think about it that way, because you're just alternating between little chain areas and puff stitch clusters until you get to the end. So I'm getting close here. One note that you can do here, because this chain space is a little bit bigger, you may want to just scoop your puff stitches together to make it come together kind of like these other ones down here. If you don't, they'll tend to kind of come apart. And it's not a big deal either way, but I just like to scoot them closer a little bit. So I'm going to do one more chain area, chain 2. Now here there's 5 single crochets, so we're still just going to skip 1 and go here. And then for the end, we're going to chain 2 and skip this one and double crochet in the last 2. So that is row 4. Row 5 is going to be basically the same exact thing as row 2, except we just have the different order of things now. So see how the puff stitches are now above the chain areas? That's kind of what I was talking about before. And this is going to be the same as row 2, except we're starting with chain areas rather than puff stitches. So I'll show you that really quick. So we're going to chain 3 like usual, double crochet in that second stitch, and then we're going to do our chain area, chain 2, single crochet in the single crochet, chain 2, and puff stitches in the puff stitch, the center of them now, just like before. Chain 2 and another puff stitch here. And I'm just going to keep repeating that across. So chain 2 to make our chain area, single crochet, chain 2, puff stitches over here. There's my first one, chain 2, and I'll make my second one in the same space. And now I just have one more chain area to do before I'm done, so I'm going to chain 2, single crochet in the single crochet, chain 2, and double crochet. And I'm just going to keep going into row 6 now, because it's very similar to the single crochet row we did before. So I'm going to chain 1 to turn, single crochet in the first 2 here. There we go. And now that chain 3 that we did down here is going to be the first thing we do, because we have to cover up and close that chain area. So chain 3, and then remember how we skip all this and we single crochet in the top of the puff stitch. And there we've closed off that chain area. Single crochet in there again, single crochet in the next puff stitch, chain 3, skip the chain area, go in the puff stitch. This row goes really fast, which is nice. Single crochet, now I'm at my last chain area, so I'm going to chain 3, close it up by just doing 2 more single crochet. So 1 in this double crochet and 1 in the chain 3 space. So this is basically the repeat that you keep doing. You keep doing ones with 3 and then 2. Of course, with yours it'll be a different number, but each repeat of how they alternate is going to have 1 less. So in mine it's 3 puff stitch clusters, and then 2 in this set. 2 chain areas in the first set and 3 chain areas here. So it alternates like that. So for row 7, technically we do 1 more row in the repeat because this first one was done with a foundation row. So in order for the written pattern to work out, we have to do a row 7 to make sure of that. So I'm just going to do this with you, and then this will be our last row. So double crochet here. Now what we're going to do is our first puff stitch. So here we've gone puff stitch area, chain area. Now we're doing another puff stitch area here. So I'm going to do my puff stitch right in that chain 3, chain 2, and do my other puff stitch here. Okay, so there's my first puff stitch cluster. Then I'm going to chain 2, and here I've got my 3 single crochet. I'm just going to go in the second one to set up my chain area, and I'm just going to keep repeating that. So now I'm doing my puff stitch in the chain 3 space, chain 2, and puff stitch, and we should just have a little bit more to go. 1 more chain area, chain 2, insert, chain 2, puff stitch clusters here in the very last chain 3 space. So there's my puff stitch, chain 2, last puff stitch, and then I'm just going to do 2 double crochet in the last 2 single crochet. So that is I don't know why I keep saying round. That is row 7. So if I scoot it back, here we have our first 2 alternating sets, and this is the beginning of our next alternating set with 3 puff stitch clusters. So to repeat this, just keep repeating rows 2 through 7, and that will be the repeat for the cowl that you just keep going and going over and over again. Make sure you check out the written pattern if you want that. It's free on the blog, or you can purchase an ad-free PDF for a low cost. So make sure you try on the cowl as you go. Just wrap it around your neck and make sure it's a good length. You just keep repeating those rows 2 through 7 until it's the length you want. And that's really it. Once you have a good length, you're just going to match the ends together. Here's my seam, and just seam it together. You can use any seaming method you want, whip stitch. I think I just used a single crochet seam because I don't like seaming. But any of your preferred method will work. Just sew it together, and there you have your brand new Everglade cowl that can keep you warm in the wintertime. So I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Please like the video and subscribe so you can see lots more fun patterns and tutorials just like this.